To the program. I'm Chris Stafford, and my guest on this episode is South African Hayley Nixon, who became the 2017 ICF Canoe Ocean Racing World Champion in Hong Kong this fall, having already won the ICF World Cup Nelo Summer Challenge this summer. In 2016, she made her mark in the sport by becoming the World Surfski Series Champion. Since the World Championships, Hayley won the Palm 2 Pimes race in Sydney after we recorded this interview. And this Saturday, December 16th, she will be racing in the 56 kilometer Cape Point Challenge Canoe Ocean Racing event in Cape Town. Before turning her hand to ocean racing, Hayley was a rower, and she will tell us about her Olympic campaign a few years ago and why now she prefers to focus on surf ski. When she's not on the water, Hayley also gives back to the sport and was named the 2017 ICF Athletes Committee representative for Canoe Marathon, as well as the women's representative on the 2017 Canoeing South Africa board. And Hayley joins me now from Sydney. Hayley, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks very much. It's great to meet and great to have this opportunity. And I've got a background of Rose Bay, so I'm not complaining. Sydney's always beautiful, and I'm happy to be here again.
So tell us why you made your way from Hong Kong to Sydney.
I've come across to Sydney after spending 2 weeks in Perth, and that Perth trip happened obviously after the Hong Kong World Championships. So basically, I'm on somewhat of a 5-week surf ski tour. And that comprises of a couple of races that make up the World Surfski Series.
Well, congratulations on becoming the world champion. Obviously, that is a big wow moment, I would imagine. Has it really sunk in yet?
It's a massively wow moment, and I don't know if it's sunk in. I think when I go home, the reality will hit because I'll actually see kind of everyone, all the loved ones and my coach and the squad, and that's who I've been building up towards. So I haven't had that kind of moment when I've walked in and seen them. But obviously I've had a couple of weeks to digest it now, and there's been a lot of really good positive feedback that's come from it. So it is sinking in, but it's just still quite surreal because kind of world champions were always other people, and I sort of held them so highly, and now I kind of feel like I'm just pretty normal, and how did I manage to pull it off? So yeah, a bit of both. It's starting to sink in, but I'm still in a little bit of shock myself.
Well, for those of us who are not familiar with surf ski or ocean racing per se, tell us what's different about it, Hayley. Okay,
so it's definitely a very good point to bring up. I mean, my background obviously was in flatwater rowing, so the sort of Oxford Cambridge style versus boat race versus sprinting, Olympic sprinting, and then skiing is a pretty dynamic sport because it kind of is uncontrollable. It just depends on what the ocean's doing and what Mother Nature's doing. So it's sometimes hard to explain because one race can be flat as a lake if there's no wind and there's no groundswell, and suddenly you feel like you're in a surf ski, which is an ocean-going boat, but you may as well be in a sprint kayak. But then within a few hours or within a few days, the sea can absolutely turn on its head, and you can have this sort of raging 3-meter groundswell meeting up with massive 30-knot wind swell, and now you're actually just effectively surfing your way through swollen runs, across the ocean and down the coast. So they really are quite extreme, and I think that's what makes it kind of so appealing and what maybe sort of really caught my attention, because coming from rowing, which was quite controlled, everyone's in their comfortable little lane and you just paddle your way down your lane, and maybe there'll be a bit of a headwind or maybe a bit of a tailwind and a little bit of chop on the water, but that's about as excessive as it gets. Whereas surf ski is just, prepare for everything and hope for the conditions that you maybe prefer, but, you better just be ready for anything.
And what sort of distances are you racing?
So surf ski races traditionally are at least 20 kilometers. So they're usually around 24 to 26 kilometers, which can take some of the top men will take around about an hour and a half or an hour 25 to do that if it's really good sort of windy conditions, and that would be seen as good. If the wind is behind you and you're riding, waves and swell, then you're obviously going to move quite fast. And it can take up to 2 hours if it's maybe a much flatter today where there's not a lot of wind or wave riding or swell assistance. So you're looking at about a 26K race and around an hour 45 to 2 hours of racing. So it's typically quite a strength endurance sport.
Well, you're someone who clearly enjoys that physical demand. What sort of training do you have to do out of the boat, Hayley?
Yeah, so I think I do like the more challenging sort of longer distance races, and I'll get into that a bit more maybe later. But the training is relatively intense. We do quite a bit of cross training. So while we're on the water and in the sea most days of the week, so almost 7 days of the week, we're also in the gym 3 times a week. We're running at least twice a week, and the occasional swim session as well. And that gym will include strength training as well as a lot of mobility and stretching and Pilates style training.
Well, since you're going forwards rather than backwards in rowing, how does it actually compare in terms of its physical demands? Is it much different?
I think there's huge sort of parallels and things in common, and I really do credit the 10 years of rowing conditioning for why I had the performance or the performances I've had. Certainly, it's a longer event, but you still do a lot of, even in rowing, we were still doing a lot of really long distance aerobic type sessions where you sort of just training the engine and conditioning the body. So if the lungs and the legs are strong and firing, then you can kind of translate that into a new sport. And you're 100% right. Canoeing, and I think a lot like rowing, has a massive demand on your core. A canoeing boat and a rowing boat have a similar setup in that your foot plate is where you kind of pushing your power into, and that paddle or the oar are basically just a lever to kind of accelerate with. So in order to have that connection between your legs and the paddle, through your shoulders and your arms, it's all about your core. So if your core is floppy or weak or not trained enough, then you can't translate that power. So it's a massive engine sport. Obviously, you have a really good cardio and physiological fitness, and then a lot of strength. It's quite a power sport, especially the downwind paddling, because it's interval after interval after interval. And then definitely a lot of technique and I would say experience to it.
Tell us a little bit about your rowing career then, Hayley. I understand you started in university. How did that all come about then? Why did you choose rowing? And why did you leave it to focus on ocean racing?
Okay, that's quite a long story, so we'll see. I'll try not bore you. But so the rowing happened a little bit by default and a little bit by choice. I was always quite a competitive swimmer at school and had definitely had swimming aspirations. But I went to a university that had just a really, really good rowing ethos and rowing team, and that was Rhodes University in Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And my older brother Wayne had been a competitive rower at university as well, and he'd said to me, I really think you'll love the sport, so when you go to Rhodes, just give it a try. And I did that. I went to Rhodes and I tried out. I had to do what every rower knows as an ergo trial. It's a 2 kilometer sprint on a rowing machine, which could be equated to torture as well. And I did the trial, and because I was quite a fit and tall and strong girl, I ended up getting a relatively sort of good score for a newcomer. And the rowing team just said, well, if you've got a little bit of engine in you, we can teach you how to row and come and join us. And that was the beginning of a 10-year sort of rowing career. So if you want me to continue a bit with that sort of road, I rowed for Rhodes for 4 years, where we focused quite a bit on the sprints, but a lot on the university's version of the Oxford-Cambridge, which was also a 4 and 6 kilometer boat race. So that's what we were passionate about in my university days. And then from there, basically the national rowing squad was beginning to base itself in Pretoria, which is in Gauteng, inland on a dam there called Rudderplaat at the High Performance Centre. And the natural progression really was if you thought you had a future in the sport, or at least you wanted to put your hat in the ring, you needed to get yourself to Pretoria to be involved with the national squad and the national rowing coaches, etc. So I took myself up there, and from about, what would it be, 2, 3, 4, 5. So from about 2006, started working with the national squad and focusing a lot on pairs rowing and single sculls rowing. And it was around about 2010 or 2009 when I was living in Sydney. I'd come over here for a few months and ended up spending a year here and rowing a bit over here, that one of the South African girls who was actually based at Boston in the States at the time decided she wanted to return to South Africa. And I spoke to my coach and from South Africa, and we decided let's give this a go. If I came back from Oz and she was happy to come back from the States, we could form a pair and try and gear ourselves up for the 2012 Olympics. And we had a really, really good sort of competitive year together where we raced a few World Cups overseas, and we were a new crew and a young crew and still learning a lot, and got a little bit bashed around by some of the senior crews overseas. And it was quite humbling because you can, especially in rowing in South Africa where it's quite a small sport, and you can be the big fish in a small pond. And I'm sure this is the same in many sports. And then you suddenly go overseas and you realize you're quite a little fish in a very big pond. So we went overseas and raced a bit and then came home, and I actually ended up with quite a bad sort of chronic overuse injury in my elbow, which resulted in surgery, and it took me out of the boat for a few months. And that was a pretty hard and devastating time for me, just sort of watching my partner kind of start forming a really good relationship with another girl. And hats off to that crew. They did really, really well and qualified themselves for Olympics. And I had a shot at trying to get back into the boat, and that's probably another story for another day or another time, or if you want to hear that story. But
oh, yes, please. This is interesting.
Oh, really? Yeah. So we, about 4 or 5 months before the 2012 Olympics, we started really having some heavy trials amongst the three of us, and just trials to see who the best two athletes would be in the boat to guarantee the sort of best result at the 2012 Olympics. And the other two girls had qualified the boat. They'd had a really good year together racing overseas, and they'd earned their spots. But of course, I think like any coach, it's good to have three of you competing. And if there was an opportunity that the boat could go faster with me in it, I'm sure he would have been excited about that. But it just, nothing really ever changed. I did all the trials. I won the 2K ergo trial. I won the single sculling trial, and we did a little bit of pairs matrix trials, and it's my times were faster with me in the boat, but only just. And I've had 5 years to kind of think about the decision that the coaches eventually made, and the coaches chose not to put me in the boat. Their right as coaches was to be subjective, I guess, and objective, and they believed that the two girls that were in the boat were going to get a better result than possibly the risk of putting me in. So as an athlete, that was heartbreaking because on paper I'd won the trials, but in their defense, maybe I hadn't done it convincingly enough. But they didn't put me in the boat, and it just broke my heart because I just couldn't understand. I was like, this is what you told me to do, and I've done it, and it's still not good enough. But I do understand that, often with crew events and with team events, I think that, the team relationship and the crew relationship is often a lot more important. And if that is secure and stable, then, that'll probably give you a better crew. So, it's a conversation maybe we'll have again as, later in the future with, me and them. But that was their decision. And they just said to me, look, you're out. Thanks for your contribution, but you're not going to go to the Olympics. And we hope that you'll stick around as reserve.
Well, that's an enormous blow, Hayley. We've heard that story before in other sports, and it's a very hard challenge for any athlete to face. How did you cope with the disappointment and move forwards?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, I think you always know, and I obviously knew I was the outsider, so I knew there was a chance that I wouldn't go, but you don't focus on that. You focus on the reasons why you're going to go. And then, when they kind of dropped this bomb on me that said, you're not going, it I mean, I'll never forget it. It's just sitting in a room with the head coach and the head sponsor, and them saying, thanks, Olympic dream is over. And I think, there's a million emotions that go through. There's this the pure sadness that you're actually not going to become the Olympian that you've always dreamed as a child you'd become. Not to sound too sort of emotional, but that's what it is. And then there's shock, and then there's also anger. I just couldn't believe that I'd been with this group for 6 or 7 years, and I'd always been a kind of a well-performing athlete, and I just thought I'd earned my stripes. And they told me, and I was very quiet, and I said thanks very much, and I pretty much walked out. There was no discussion. I couldn't discuss it there and then. And then I remember going home and sitting on the floor of my bedroom and just bawling. I mean, crying like like the world had fallen apart. And there's a sense of just being embarrassed because I'd become Hayley the rower. Like, I didn't know what else I was. So here I was, I think I was about 28 years old and literally a couple of months away from fulfilling Hayley the rower, Hayley the Olympian. And suddenly it was just over because someone didn't choose me. So yeah, it was devastating. And, the squad handled it quite well, and my coach, in the sense that he said, look, this is really hectic for you, and we advise that you go and see the sports psychologist and you chat through this for a while. And they all took off onto a training camp. So the deal was, you stay at home, chat to the sports psychologist, chat to us, and then when you're ready, please come and join us, because obviously they needed me and they wanted me to stay on as an active reserve until the girls actually got on the plane for London. But I stuck around for a few days and had my chats and thought, actually, before I did that, I kind of appealed the situation. I went and drew out all the results that we had on paper of all the testing. And I just sent quite a polite email back saying, I just need to know how I haven't been selected based on these results. I guess anybody just thinks, let me try one more time. Like, I'm not convinced that this is the right decision, so I'm going to give it one more go. And there were a few meetings and a few things were said, but eventually the answer came back that thanks for sending the results through, and we've seen these now, but we still just have to go with what the coaches have decided. So yeah, so once I'd done that, I said, fine, I'll go back on training camp. But truth be told, there was such a deep cut, and unfortunately the one girl who was going was still a little bit injured, so she was doing the training sessions on a bicycle, and the other girl was doing training sessions next to me, and it's a long story, and I'm not sure how much I must go into, but it was difficult to train with the two girls and not constantly compare myself to them. And I was on the camp for probably 4 or 5 days before I actually just went back to the head coach and I said, I can't do this, it's too soon, and I need to go home, and I'll continue training there, and I'll think about my options, and you can focus on the other two girls, but I'm not going to sit here and every day compare myself to them and wonder why I'm not going and they are. And it's a difficult area to be in, and I think it was hard on the other two girls as well, because I'm sure they had a sense of relief that they were going, but maybe awkwardness that the three of us had to sit there and act like there wasn't a big massive pink elephant in the room.
Yes, of course, that's tremendously difficult for all of you. So was that the tipping point then, Hayley, for you to decide this sport wasn't for you and that you were going to try something else?
Yeah, definitely. My mom had also said to me, there's not a lot of funding for sport in South Africa, and my parents had been amazing in supporting me, and a lot of it financially. And they kind of said, you've studied, you've got honors degrees, you've got an option for another career. We're going to back you until the 2012 Olympics, but thereafter you're on your own. So of course, now that I wasn't going to the Olympics meant there wasn't probably going to be much of a future for me in terms of support from SASCOC after Olympics. I sort of went home and licked my wounds a bit, and I was like, I'm going to have to move on. I can't leave my parents. They're not going to support me anymore, and I don't know if I can go through another 4 years of this and in 4 years' time still not go to the Olympics again. So yes, absolutely. I went back to Durban, and I just kind of rethought my options, and basically I was just going to start practicing what I'd studied, which was biokinetics. So I was going to look for a job and grow up and be a real adult, which is a tough pill to swallow when you've kind of just absolutely focused all your attention on sport and sporting achievements and that as your career. Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned, you are a biokineticist by profession. How did that career choice come about, Hayley?
It was a great choice for me. I started university studying an economics degree, thinking that I would go the business route. And I think that was possibly because I wasn't sure what I wanted when I left school. So I just sort of was, kind of followed suit with what everybody else was doing. And quite quickly into the sort of more business degree, I realized it wasn't where I wanted to be, and I wanted to be involved more in sports or in human physiology and human kinetics, etc. So I changed to what was an undergraduate degree called human kinetics and ergonomics, and I just loved it. It was what I'd always loved at school. It was biology and science and sport and movement. I loved the sports psychology side of it. I loved all of it, and obviously always being passionate about sport myself and always being competitive. It was easy because sure, I had to learn the textbook, but a lot of it was experience that I had day to day. And to this day, I think a lot of what I do is, or the parts that I may be good at in my field, are because I've been an athlete, because I've been injured, because I know what it's like to have a setback, because I know what it's like to need to do rehab exercises, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that first-hand experience has been really important, and I think that's why that made my degree such a natural one for me. And then afterwards, once I'd done the undergrad, moving up to Pretoria to try and establish myself in rowing gave me the opportunity to then do an honours degree in sports science and then a second honours degree in the biokinetics. So, it also lent itself to training because I was effectively a student for 7 years, which was great. So I could study and I could attend lectures, but I could also train really hard, which was really important to me. So I was very lucky in that regard.
Yes, that all fit in rather nicely into the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. I was living the dream.
Well, I'm curious now that you are a world champion, which is often the pinnacle for many athletes. Where do you see yourself going now, Hayley? What's on your bucket list?
Yeah, so I think, I haven't had a lot of time to kind of process this, but obviously it's been on my mind. And yeah, I think becoming world champion is, it obviously is the pinnacle. And now I kind of feel like I can move across to something else if I wanted to. Obviously, there's the desire to race more and do other races. There are other races on the series that I haven't done and I haven't had the opportunity to attend and that I would like to keep doing. But another part of me also just feels like I want to get involved in sport and in the sport of surfski or of canoeing in other ways now. Like maybe I can use this to now get more into the development side or the women's development side, the coaching side, the sports management side. So I love the sport of canoeing. It's been a short relationship, but it's been a passionate one. And I loved rowing. Like I walked away from rowing very abruptly. It was a bad and a sudden breakup, and there's still a lot of love for that sport. So I think if I'm answering your question in a bit of a roundabout way, I still want to race, but I sort of see myself as trying to move across to, more of a, more of a management or more of a, I don't know, like I say, like a coaching and a sort of a giving back role. I'd love to be at events, commentate at events, see if I can coach more clinics. And especially in South Africa, we need to grow the women's numbers. So we were actually having a chat last night about trying to run an event next year that's just for women paddlers. So there's a lot to do on that front. And I'm involved with the International Canoe Federation's Athletes Committee now. So we've really got to get in touch with the athletes and try and do things better moving forward. And I think I'm ready for that. I think I've it's been quite a sacrifice, as anyone will say, to try and train and compete at this level. To actually look back now and go, I did it. I got the gold medal is hugely satisfying. So now I'm like, okay, cool. So let's try and do something else now. Like we've ticked that box. So that's, having only thought about it for a few weeks, that's definitely the route I want to take.
What do those opportunities look like then, Hayley? You mentioned South Africa, but of course you're used to the world stage as well. How does that compare? Last
night I was actually sent a picture of the the male versus female participant numbers at some of the significant races this year on the World Surfski Series, and it's frightening. The women's numbers are really low relative to the men's, but I also am a strong believer that that's not really women's fault. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we weren't able to do these sports. We weren't sort of allowed to do them, or it wasn't encouraged. So I don't think it's that it's the women to blame. I just think, we started late. And now there's been this amazing shift where, although the numbers of women are significantly lower than the men's, and I get that, the standard of women's paddling is very relatively equal to the men's. And I think that's important. So it's not like we only have a few women and they're 100 million miles behind the men. We have quite equal performances, but just, 10 of us versus 150 of them. So what we need to do is just is try and build the momentum and build the opportunity from the younger ages, but also I think from that field of women that's 35 to 60 who have maybe retired from the sports they were doing and have got young kids, or their kids are moving out the house and now they've got the time on their hands, but they just don't know where to start. And I think that's why the South African market is so massive. And there's a lot of men of that age category who've left running and left rugby and have now started paddling because it's a low impact sport, and it's easy on the joints and it's very sociable. And why haven't women followed suit as well? So I think a couple of us need to really give them the opportunity and encourage them, host women's clinics, provide stable boats, double them, get them in a double with a competent woman or a competent male, and help them build their confidence by not being scared. So get in the boat with somebody else, have a lovely paddle around Vetchi's Pier, see some dolphins, really get them excited about what they can get from being out there. And then, of course, the health side and all that. So it's been a male-dominated sport, and it is changing, but it's going to be a very long evolution if we just, to kind of morph on its own. We need to get proactive, and I'm quite keen to do that because I've already done a few, like, stand on my soapbox and burn my bra expeditions back in South Africa to try and get women, equal rights and equal prize money and et cetera, et cetera. But I know that the big issue is the participation. So I'm going to try and make that my personal passion back home. And there's a couple of other women that are keen. So it's going to be exciting, I think.
Well, yes, quite. It's all about access and opportunity. But how are the women regarded, Hayley, when it comes to sponsorship opportunities in the sport?
Yeah, so the sponsorship has been amazing. There's been a huge change towards sponsoring women. And I would almost, I don't know what men are getting sponsored necessarily versus what the women are, but I do know that in the last year to 18 months, I've had so many sponsors come on board, and they are keen and they are passionate about the women. And I've seen sponsors like my sponsors, like Eurosteel, like Vicobia, I've seen them just, engage wholeheartedly with the women. Like, they actually want to see the women doing well, and they want to see those barriers dropped. So if they need a bit of sponsorship to get them into races and to get them to events, they're only too keen to help. And also on the media side, there's been a big switch to covering more of the women's races, to covering more of the women leading up to the races, to get them into the papers, to get them onto TV, which is obviously hugely important because it becomes that, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So then the sponsors are happy. So then the sponsors are more keen, and the women are getting seen on TV. So they're more keen, and then their peers are seeing them. So, okay, cool. I want a piece of that. So they're getting involved. So I would have to say it's been hugely positive. And I'd imagine it's only going to grow. And I heard some of the stats at the ICF Ocean Racing World Champs now in Hong Kong. And apparently there were like more people viewing the women's race than there were viewing the men's race. I'll go and double check that, but it was hugely popular. So that's really good to see, yeah.
Well, that's very good news and really bodes well for women in the sport. Very encouraging. Now, I read somewhere, Hayley, that you almost ventured across the Atlantic in a rowing boat, an 8-man rowing crew. How did that come about, and is that still on your bucket list?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So that I have to give credit to. There's a guy I rowed with at university called Cameron Bellamy, and Cameron's gone on to be a phenomenal open water swimmer. And anyway, when just after the Olympic selection, I I was sitting with my mom, and she saw an article in the newspaper about Cameron, and it said that Cameron was trying to raise money for his organization, which was the Bunye Challenge, and that they wanted to row across the Atlantic in an 8-man crew. And one of the fundraisers, or one of the sort of adventure expeditions they were going to do to get a little bit of airtime and things like that, was to cycle the Land's End to John O'Groats. That have you heard of that? It's a cycling race across the UK.
Absolutely, the whole length of the UK.
Yes, it's like 1,500 kilometers, I'm just trying to remember. Now, I knew Cameron really well, so there I was, fit as a fiddle and not going to the Olympics. So I sent him a message and I said, Cam, I've been rowing my heart out for the last 4 years. I'm not going to London for the Olympics, but I hear you doing the cycle. I hear you want to find crew for the Atlantic crossing. I mean, I'm in, both of them. Can I join you? And he was obviously amazed. And he said, yeah, Hales, if you can get to London, we're going in, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whenever they were going. And you're welcome to join us. And then, yes, of course, if you want to be part of the crew for the Atlantic crossing, we would love you. I mean, for them to have a rower on board and another South African and a woman, they were ecstatic. So the sort of shortened version of the story is that I did fly over and join them for the Land's End to John O'Groats, and that was amazing. I mean, that was a lifetime experience. And then we started doing these fundraisers to try and raise money, because it was something like 2 million rand or something, which is a lot of money, is still a lot of money now, and was a lot of money then, that we needed to raise to put this crew together. And we actually also did a 24-hour solo rowing machine world record attempt. So that was another story that I can or cannot tell. But we did all these events to try and build up for the Atlantic crossing. But unfortunately, it got to the stage where I wasn't getting any sponsors to come on board. So the money was the big limiting factor. Cam had a few things organized. He was working in London. A couple of the other crew members were sort of getting their share of the money together, but I couldn't get my share together. And I must give credit to Cameron again, because we were going to get in this boat to row across the Atlantic. I started thinking, well, how am I going to get any sort of ocean experience? Like, it's quite a gnarly thing just to jump into a boat and row across an ocean. And I didn't have a lot of ocean experience. So I spoke to some of the Durban Surfski paddlers, and one of the guys was a guy called Barry Learn, who was running an ABC Surfski class. And I said to him, look, can I please come and learn how to paddle a Surfski, because it's the closest thing I can get to being in the ocean in a rowing boat. And he said, yes, of course. And one thing led to another. So then I started Surfski paddling with them and started falling in love with the sport. And then unfortunately couldn't get the money together to join Cameron for the Atlantic crossing. So eventually I had to say to him, look, bud, you need to replace me. I'm not going to get the cash together. And the upside was I'd fallen in love with another sport, which was canoeing and kayaking. So I sort of removed myself from the Atlantic crossing and then got stuck into canoeing. And that's obviously how that whole 4-year kind of endeavor started. But the crew did carry on. Cameron went, and another friend of mine who I'd rowed with from South Africa, Tato, went in the crew as well. And they had a really great Atlantic crossing. And Cameron, I lie, he actually ended up crossing the Pacific Ocean from Australia to Madagascar. But anyway, yes, so that is still on the list. I mean, I would absolutely still do that if I had the opportunity. So yeah, I got close, but unfortunately couldn't go fully through it, but I don't regret it, because of course it led to canoeing, and it's subsequently led to being a world champion. So no regrets there.
Well, that just shows that fitness is never wasted.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's a great story, Hayley, going from rowing to becoming the world champion in ocean racing, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come from you too. The future is very exciting. I'm sure new doors will open for you, but in the meanwhile, the very best of luck with the races that you have still to come this year. We'll be following you on social media, and of course, do come back anytime and give us an update, Hayley. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, wonderful. Good, thank you. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity and the chat, and it's been amazing, and I'm honored to have spoken with you guys, so I really appreciate it, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was great to talk to you. Thanks again, Hayley.
All right. All the best. Cheers.
And we'll have links in our show notes to Hayley's social media. That's all at wispsports.com, where you'll find many more conversations from the world of women's sports, including blogs, articles, videos, and there's over 700 podcasts across all sports around the world at WiSP Sports Radio, either online at wispsports.com or on any podcast player. It's a free subscription and there are over 30 shows to choose from. And with a global audience of more than 1.5 million, we want to thank you, the listener, for making WiSP Sports Radio the world's largest podcast network for women's sports. And of course, we would love to hear from you. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions about the shows we cover or the athletes we talk to, please drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. You can also catch up with us on all social media channels at WiSP Sports. Until the next time, thank you for listening.